my alcoholism during this time was ever present and ever morphing. I was always trying to find a way to get the spiritual salve that I needed from alcohol and drugs, but also maintain my capacity to be successful at a high level. What's really sad about it is that I was actually, basically, I was passed out on the couch. I was high the whole time. And I got roused by the call, and you can see me you can see me sleep. And great excuse, I'm tired and it's been a long process and all this stuff, but really I was loaded, man.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters. And our very special guest today is Jeff Hatch. And Jeff, I met about 4 years ago in Atlanta and then reconnected with him in Seattle like 4 days ago or so. And he's recently joined some friends of ours who one's been on the program at Eagle Creek Ranch Recovery in Idaho. And I just wanted to say special welcome and thank you for being here, Jeff.
Thank you for having me, B. Reeves. I'm grateful to be here with you, man. Yeah. Excited to talk to you.
Yeah. When I first met you, I mean, somebody told me that, introduced me to you and they're like, he played in the NFL. And so Jeff, I mean, I'm sure you're sick of talking about it, but you know what? I don't really care because we want to hear about it. And so Jeff was an NFL player, played college at UPenn, and now he's been in our field for about the same amount of time I have, about 5 years. Is that about right?
Well, I stepped away for a minute, but I actually started, the first time I started working in the field was really shortly after I retired and went to treatment. I mean, the shocking story in our business, right? I got hired by the place I went to treatment at. And that was actually way back in 2006.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Cool. And then, like I said, I was there for a while, faded away from the field for a minute, and then, came back probably about that time, about 5 years ago.
Okay, cool. Well, from what what we talked about, and you're one of those people where I start talking and then I realize I would love for you to be on the podcast. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to not talk to him again until we do this. So it's true. Cause I don't want to, I don't want to waste it all. So, and I did some cursory research. So we want to hear from you, man. This is about you. This isn't about us, but, so just, lay it on us. Like, how did you, tell us about your career and how it led to you getting sober and getting into the field and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I appreciate that. It keeps it way more organic if we haven't talked about this 14 times before we get on here to do this. So I appreciate that. And, I'm a guy, I would say I'm a typical person with alcoholism in the sense that when I trace it back, I think I was probably born restless, irritable, and discontent. I found my medicine at 13 with alcohol. But I was sharp enough at the time to know that there would be a time, this is my thought at the time, I'll achieve enough stuff third dimensionally, material plane, that I will no longer feel this way about myself and I won't have to drink alcohol or use drugs anymore. Right? Yeah. So I was 100% convinced I'd have a third dimensional solution to a fourth dimensional problem. But so I tried to do that, man. And it really drove me. My father was alcoholic. And I think another driver for me was trying to bring joy into a household that was not joyful. And that's not to say I wasn't loved and my parents didn't try to do their best by me and my sister. It's just, it was an environment where it was sad a lot of times. And I wanted to bring happiness. And I thought the best way to do that was to, achieve great things. And so I tried to do that, and I'll just fast forward. I'll tell you, I didn't play football until I was a junior in high school, actually. I was a basketball player, really. I mean, I was everything growing up sports-wise, and then I kind of focused on basketball and actually transferred to a school to play basketball there before my junior year in high school. And the football coach came in the gym, and I was in there shooting around. And at that point, I was probably like 6'5" and like 250. And he was like, look, we have 20 guys on the team. You're bigger than everybody at the school. Will you please play football? And I was like, if you ask my mom and she says it's okay, I absolutely will. And he did. And She said, okay. And that really changed the course of my life. I mean, I was a good enough basketball player that I would have played in college, Patriot League, Ivy League level, Service Academy level. Um, but once football started, it was a game that I really just took to. I had an ability for it early, and then also it was the first time, like I had been big since I was born. Um, I was as tall as my teacher in the third grade, right? Like all the things. So not only did I have alcoholism, but I also had this other separating factor from my peers in the sense that I was a lot bigger than everyone, and I was not like an aggressive alpha type kid. So I got picked on a lot. And I remember when I started playing football, there was this opportunity to kind of like expel all this suppressed aggression, and be rewarded and cheered for it. And I loved it. So I went to college at Penn and went to play football there, and became more successful as I went with the game. And by the time I was a senior, I was a first team All American, and that's one AA level, right? We were not like Big Ten ACC level, right? We're talking about University of Pennsylvania, so it's the Ivy League. But I was still a first team All American at that level, and um, was a part of a documentary called Hey Rookie, Welcome to the NFL. It was the first year ESPN did it, and they asked me to do that. And another documentary for CNNSI called Goal to Go, that was kind of following my path from the Ivy League to the NFL. And I say that to say that life got really big really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And my alcoholism during this time was ever present and ever morphing. I was always trying to find a way to get the spiritual salve that I needed from alcohol and drugs, but also maintain my capacity to be successful at a high level. And so I was able to do it. And I ended up getting drafted by the Giants in the third round in 2002. And, again, like life changed in that moment. And I'll tell you this, I remember I was mentioning to somebody last week that because of those documentaries, I have the footage of me getting the call when I got drafted by the Giants. And what's really sad about it is that I was actually basically I was passed out on the couch. I was high the whole time. And I got roused by the call, and you can see me you can see me sleep, and great excuse. I'm tired and it's been a long process and all this stuff, but really I was loaded, man. And so that was kind of the masquerade, right? And me and you talking now, I'll tell you this is that while I was training for the draft, what happens when you get to that level is like, I remember for me, what happened was my senior year of college, the fourth game of the season, when we're playing at Columbia, I walk off the field after the game, and a guy in a suit comes up to me and hands me a business card and says, I'm an agent, and I think you got a chance to go pro, and I would love to represent you. And that had never happened before. And from there, it exploded. And so once I hired an agent, they send you basically to train in the skill set required to be successful at your pro day. Your 40-yard dash, your shuttle, your vertical, your bench. And he did that. And I went to a speed and strength training school, and I ended up injuring my back while I was there. And I didn't even know
Can I
it.
ask you a question, a backup question? If you're in college before NIL and you hire an agent, what does that look like in terms of monetary, transaction?
Well, they're paying for everything with the expectation that you're going to reimburse them with a percentage of your contract that comes in.
Okay.
So I think it's a guessing game for them a little bit. Now I can't even imagine what it looks like now.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, so I do that, and I injured my back, and basically what we came to realize was that I had herniated a disc, and my agent was like, look, you have two options. One, we disclose, you don't get drafted, and we pay for the surgery and then have to try to get you signed as a free agent the next year. Or you push through, take some painkillers, push through as long as you can, get drafted as high as you can. And then once they've invested in you and like it gets bad enough that you need surgery, then you can raise the white flag and get the surgery. And But I remember that being the first time in my life walking through that where I was like carrying like a big fraudulent, I felt very fraudulent, you know?
Right.
And I think that comes to all of us that end up in this space of like requiring some semblance of treatment for our alcoholism, that there's a period of time where we feel like real fraudulent in our behavior and actions. And that was the first time I felt that way. And um, I remember it was my rookie year. So that's what happened. I get drafted in the third round. I go to the Giants. I fight as long as I can, and I finally like take a hit that just knocks me out, and I have to get surgery. I got put on injured reserve my rookie year. I remember right around that time coming home to my townhouse, and I had this like in my mind. I had this list of material achievements that I was going to get. And then at the end of achieving those things, I would be happy and satisfied and I wouldn't have to drink and drug. And so it was my rookie year in the NFL. And, you know, I had graduated from Penn with a degree in political science, philosophy, and economics. I won the President's Award for Community Service. I'd been a first team All American and a third round draft pick. I'd signed my $1 million contract, bought my first house, my car, all the stuff. And I still hated myself.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had no idea at that time that I was dealing with alcoholism. It was just a really scary thought of like, oh no. And you know, my addiction really went off the rails from there. I spent really the entirety of my NFL career, those 4 years, up to that point in the worst shape I'd ever been with my disease. You know, I had easy access. I had the means to get whatever I wanted. And so that looked like me, you know, just, this is in 2002 through 2006. So really like just taking copious amounts of painkillers, smoking a bunch of marijuana, drinking a bunch of alcohol, some cocaine here and there, you know, stuff like that. And my fourth year, I was with the Buccaneers, and I got injured again and had to get a spinal fusion to retire. And so that was like that was a big one.
Yeah. I mean, just backing up, I mean, it sounds like, you know, you knew looking back, you drank, you were born and had the ism, and then found the solution early in alcohol, but weren't necessarily really trying to cover up anything yet other than, you know, you were trying to bring some joy into the family home. And then, then as you know, you're all of us, you're this really tall, kind of gentle giant, which even though being tall is, you know, by like evolutionary standards is probably more, you know, desirable than being like a small, but it still set you apart on some level. But then you start really, like you said, like this 3D game of trying to get external, fill this void with external factors. But then you really had, then you've got this injury, which is physical pain, which needs to be dealt with. But then also more importantly, now you've got this real hole in your heart from this fraudulent act. And now to cover that up takes even more. And this, you know, I'm just now kind of extrapolating my own experiences with this. Like the more stuff I need to cover up and the bigger the stuff it is, the more dirt has to be piled on top of it, you know?
Yes.
And then, yeah. And then now, you know, years of that and with the injuries and then all the money, I mean, I can just see this being like a, you know, a powder keg.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think that I didn't know, again, I didn't know what I was really dealing with at that point. But it was a powder keg. And so when I had that spinal fusion and couldn't play anymore, that was really a moment of, you know, one of the great things about being an alcoholic is I can justify and rationalize any behavior to make myself feel better about what I'm doing, right? And I had a really good excuse that like the things I'm doing to perform at this level are what they are, but I'm in rarefied air here. So you don't get to tell me what I can or can't do to make it through the day as an NFL football player. I'm going to do what I have to do. It was after the injury though that I was no longer an NFL football player, that I was just a guy with like a really bad addiction problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly didn't play in the NFL, but you know, I totally relate to that because when my dad was diagnosed with cancer in 2017 in June, and I was very sad. I, love my dad very close. I mean, but I was also like, you know what? Nobody can question me. Who are you to question me? Your dad's not the one dying. I can self-medicate. And then he did die. And then I have even more of an excuse, but then guess what? Like that excuse was gone. And I was left with my own soul sickness, my thoughts, and my addiction. And that was, in a way, it kind of exacerbated and accelerated what was already kind of happening. And maybe that happened for you too, but I know what you mean. It's like, who are you to question me? You had this sort of a different version of that. Like, hey, I'm a NFL football player. I was a All-American, third round draft. Who are you to question me? And do you know how hard it is to get through an NFL season? How much pain I'm in? I mean, I had like my own kind of, like emotional pain version of that. Like, at least according to me and my rationalization.
Absolutely, man. I love that you said that soul sickness too. That's a really good, I think that's a good way for people who don't understand what we have to kind of maybe get a little bit of a grasp on it. And I'm sorry you went through that. That's incredibly trying. I lost my dad 3 years ago. It was not cancer. It was a slow, steady decline over a period of time. So it was, I think, probably easier to process as a result of that. But it
I'm
doesn't,
sorry, man.
that kind of hole that gets put in you from that experience. And, just to speak on that for a second, we just lost a pet, last Thursday. It was a cat that my wife had for its entire life. She got it when it was 6 weeks old. It died at 19. In This is that thing of what I at least try to do with life is like, okay, so she's experiencing a level of grief and pain around losing this animal that she really hasn't experienced. She's not lost anyone in her family close to her. And I think this is probably the most loved thing she's ever lost. And for me to be able to kind of sit with her and like talk about what my grief process felt like, and be present for her as she goes through hers, right? Like, I think that's just a microcosm of like what my whole existence is about in terms of how do I be useful and helpful? Well, if I can take these experiences that were incredibly painful and trying to then help someone else, it just changes the texture internally of what those things look and feel like. And so, I always say to new guys when I work with them, like, your unique experience is going to be the thing that helps some guy who walks in the rooms. You don't know who it's going to be, but like, if it hasn't happened yet, I'm sure somewhere along the way, there's going to be a newcomer whose dad is going through a situation like your dad did. And like, God willing, you'll be able to be there and like reach a hand out to that dude and help him in a way that I never could, which is, this incredible, I feel like that's the divine piece of what recovery looks like, right? Like that's this piece of it that's, you just can't put words on what that is.
Absolutely. And being able to share our experience, strength, and hope is not limited to our experience with drugs and alcohol. I mean, it can be with grief and with death and just life experiences. And then on that same note, I mean, you're exactly right. And the answer is yes, I have had that happen. I mean, just recently I had a situation where I made a really stupid purchase. When I get, when I do stupid stuff sober, I just can't believe it that I'm still capable of doing stuff like this. And my sponsor was like, "Oh, go share about it." And then today, when you get to this meeting, and I guarantee you, people will come up to you after, and he was exactly right. And the thing, and again, I mean, this is like a kind of trivial version of it, but it's true. And the thing is, if I hear of somebody share about, they that this guy played, professional tennis and he hurt himself, and then he was trying to fill a God-sized hole. I don't have that experience, but you know who I do know? I know Jeff Hatch, and I'll put you in touch with him.
That's it.
You know,
So cool, man.
yeah.
Yeah. We could talk about that for multiple episodes of those kind of experiences, and hopefully we'll get to a little bit towards the end. But I do want to say that, like, I was lucky in that time when I had the spinal fusion and was forced into retirement. I was lucky in the sense that I was already in the NFL substance abuse program. Shock. And so the stipulations of that were I had to go see a psychiatrist once a week in Tampa. And it was this woman named Dr. Martha Brown. And she basically saw all the pro athletes in that area. And I would have to see her once a week and then get urine tests. And now the urine test only tested for marijuana because that was all I had been positive for initially. So I could do everything else. as long as I didn't smoke marijuana. And I would leave my apartment one time a week to go see her. And that was it. Um,
Wow.
and you know, it got like, it was incredibly dark. Um, that was the first time in my life that like I experienced like moments of depression and like sadness along the way, melancholy, all those things. But at this time in my life, that was the first time I felt what I would call that like soul sickness on a level that was, you know, I don't know if I can keep going kind of level,
Right.
you know. And I will say too, again, just to like shout out recovery, like it's one of my favorite things about meeting other people in sobriety and recovery is that we really don't have to say much to each other. If we look each other in the eyes, I can tell that you know where that place is and you've been there and like you're not there now. And I
Right.
love that piece of what we have, man. It's so special, dude. It's like they're just the best people I ever meet are the other people I meet in recovery. And that's no love lost for normies. There's some incredible people out there, but like, I just won't vibe with you the same as I do with somebody else who's been where I've been.
I completely hear you. And then, and I, it reminded me of another thing that I've learned. I feel like everything I've learned, everything I know that's worth, valuable to me, I've either learned it in the last, almost 7 years, or it's stuff that was presented to me earlier, but I rejected it, or I misinterpreted, or I, discarded it, or whatever it was. But, and, and, something I heard early and I love is, they say religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell, and spirituality is for people who have been to hell.
I love it.
And that's kind of, yeah, exactly. I mean, and like that, and yeah, I mean, like I have so many normie friends and we can talk about other kind of deep stuff that maybe I wasn't capable of talking about authentically before I got sober. And we have that, but but the real vibe, is with the people who have been to hell, and have come out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you use authentically too. I'm like, I'm super, that's a very, very, very important thing to me. Living authentically. And, you
Yeah.
know, I just think that, I don't know, it comes up a lot. And I notice for myself, I notice in this iteration of sobriety, because there was a relapse in my path, um, doing the work on a much deeper level has enabled me to be comfortable being my authentic self out in the world. And what a difference that makes for other people. Not just myself in the way I view and walk through life, but like, it's as simple as like when I go to the bagel shop, when I'm checking out at the counter at the bagel shop and I ask the person working, like, how's your day going? They can tell that I actually want to know how their day is going. Like you can see it. You can see their
Yeah.
face change. And like what a gift that is, man, to be able um to be useful in that way, just to provide some real connection to people who I think may not get it enough is like, man, love it.
I hear you just reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in a while. And on that note, just asking, because people in general aren't used to people genuinely asking how they're doing and caring. And you're right. And I mean, and to take that a step further, one time I was probably 2 years sober and I was at a chopped salad place. And this young kid just completely screwed up my whole order over. I mean, he was just total botch, and I was kind of let him have it, and then I took my salad and went over and I'm like putting my little individual pepper and salt packets on it. And the guy's standing over there and I was like, what's wrong with you? And I just went over to the kid, but he was probably 16 or 17 years old. And I was like 43. And I went up to him and I wanted to talk to him again. And he was like, oh my God, scared to talk to me. Thought I was going to berate him again. I said, hey man, I just wanted to acknowledge I was really a jerk back there and I'm really sorry. And I really hope it never happens again. If there's anything else I can do to make it right, please tell me. And the look on the guy's face it actually was probably more shocking than when I actually kind of yelled at him for messing up the order. But still, I mean, but the thing is, that was hopefully good for him and it was certainly good for me. And I think it was good for the universe.
I love that last little piece you added there. Good for the universe. I believe in that, man. I believe that energy put out is like what comes back, and that, yeah, I think there's no question to me, man. He probably still remembers that, and like especially in those formative years, that
Yeah.
yeah, it's impossible to overstate the impact of things like that. Um,
Yeah.
and so let's see. I'm going to see her once a week. I end up overdosing, end up in Tampa General Hospital. Now, I had tried to detox myself previous times and I had grand mal seizures. And
Mm.
just tell you like the depths of my alcoholism and my capacity to like be dishonest about it or like unwilling to share that truth of myself. I had grand mal seizures. I ended up getting diagnosed epileptic, being put on this drug called Depakote, having
Mhm.
my license taken for 6 months, and living that BS because I was too afraid to go. Actually, those seizures were a result of me trying to detox, and you know, I don't actually have epilepsy. No, I'll take this drug for like 5 years, not drive for 6 months, whatever it takes to like maintain the cover. Uh,
Right.
so I'd overdosed. I'm in the hospital. She comes and sees me, and she's basically like, "Look, you've had seizures before. You need to get help. Go to this place and detox for a couple weeks, and then do whatever you want to do." Um, and that's what ended up getting me on a plane to North Louisiana to go to treatment. And that's what really, I mean, again, that was another piece of life that was like kind of luck of the draw, transformative for me, right? I didn't know what treatment looked like. I thought it was going to be like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and everyone's going to be in gowns, drooling on themselves, and I got to this place, and I experienced what we had just talked about. There were people there like me, and it was the first time I'd ever been surrounded by people like me. Um, and what a relief it was, man. It was so powerful. And I ended up sticking around. I got to that 2 week mark, and the whole time I was there, I was telling everyone I was leaving after 2 weeks. And I got to the end of that 2 week mark, and this guy who had been there a couple weeks, he had just gotten his 30-day chip. And he came to me, and we become close. He had actually committed vehicular manslaughter under the influence of benzos and was, in treatment before trial. So he knew he was going to prison for a long time. Um, and he was like, "Look, I don't know what's happening, but if you just stick around a little bit longer, because like something's starting to happen in me that's different, and I think you should try and see if you can get there." And I was like,
That's amazing.
okay. Like I didn't really have anything to go back to. I had an apartment in Tampa, but my career there was done. Um, what the heck, why not? And sure enough, I stuck around and got to that 30 days, and there was no like drastic light bulb moment for me then or really ever in early sobriety, right? It was just that like at 30 days, I did notice that I was starting to be capable of making eye contact with other human beings again. It was that base,
Yeah.
you know,
That's one of the promises, when
and
I think about fear of people and of economic insecurity leaving us, that's what it's all about, being able to look the world in the eye.
that's it. I
Yeah.
love that you said that too, because I get really annoyed when people are in the rooms and they talk about the promises coming true and it's all material stuff. And I'm like, no, dude, that's not what they're talking about, dude.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know? So yeah, I stayed at that treatment center 104 days, moved into a halfway house there, all the things, got my first sober job. So I got my little job as a customer service associate at the movie gallery in Rayville, Louisiana. Um, and so I always tell like new guys if they're giving me stuff about like taking a sober job and it's like beneath them or whatever that is, I'm like, dude, I was a left tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then I was a service associate at the movie gallery in Rayville, Louisiana. Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. And I loved it, man. I found like I really enjoyed people. And I wanted to sell more discount movie cards than anybody working there. And if you wanted to ask me when in The Little Mermaid such and such happened, I wanted to know the answer so I could tell you. I just was like falling in love with being alive and being a part of again. Um, Working the steps with my sponsor, right? Like doing the deal. Um, and then they came and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing business development in treatment?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that is." And that's what got me in the field, you know?
God, so funny. It's so similar. I went to treatment and wasn't my idea. Didn't want to go, went to get people off my back. And I said I was leaving tomorrow every day for like 5 days, probably. And but I didn't really, I didn't know it, but I was practicing one day at a time. Even then, I didn't know it. But I honestly, like, I got there, I got on my knees the night I got there. Everybody was so nice and welcoming, and I was like, okay, this isn't so bad. When I got to my room and saw my roommate's bed that was 2 feet from mine with all his clothes stacked on it, and I got on my knees and wept and just said, God, what have you done to me? And then I moped around for 5 days saying, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm leaving tomorrow. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to leave. What can I do to make this go by fast?
There you go.
And like, I think I had what happened to me, what happened to your benzo buddy in your treatment center is like, I started participating. I thought about being a kid in church if I didn't pick up the hymnal and sing and just stood there blankly staring at ahead to hope to sit down again. It went by super slowly, but if I participated and sang along, it went by like that. I just applied that, and dude, I heard what I needed to hear, which was my way of doing things, got me half a room at that treatment center. And that I, started to feel better. And it started going by fast, but most importantly, I just like I had a spiritual experience, get out of the shower one day. I felt a voice, felt it, didn't hear it, felt a voice tell me I was going to be successful. And I did not take that to be rich and famous, that I was going to be all right. But it's the first time I'd felt like I was going to be okay in about 20 years, honestly, maybe even longer. And just I came out on fire for it and on fire for recovery, but not this job. The reason that I'm even bringing this up is because you said, what is that about business development? And I came out and went back to work in sales for a couple of years. But I've been in treatment for a month, and there were doctors and nurses and counselors and techs and cooks and maintenance people, but it never occurred to me that there was this job that had to happen where people needed to go make the world aware that these places exist, and maybe equally as important, going and seeing other ones to make sure that they're good enough to refer to,
Sure.
and know what other people are doing. And so like, I literally it never occurred to me this was a job, and all of a sudden I was presented with an opportunity to work in the field, and I just kind of took a little bit of a leap of faith. I was like, I love talking about recovery, and I do have a sales background. I like talking to people and traveling, and here we are.
It's awesome.
It's crazy.
It's awesome. Yeah, it is crazy, and it's so neat. And yeah, I mean, I find that, right? Like, I find a lot of times, for whatever reason, the deeper connections I make with people we end up having like these incredible similarities in our journeys and our paths, right? Like, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, yeah, this guy, you're a genuine human being, right? And like, that to me, I notice my capacity to be honest with myself and others presents me with an opportunity to be more authentic version of myself. And as a result, I'm then connected to other people that are the same. And I love that, man. So kudos. I'm so glad you found your way into the space, man.
Well, you too, man. And I remember meeting you that day in Atlanta, and then I've what time I heard you, but I'm so glad to have been reconnected with you in Seattle.
Yeah.
So cool. And now you're working with, I think you'll be the first person on our podcast. And we've done like, I don't know, like we're probably at 160, we've done one a week for 2.5 years, basically,
Wow.
who are from the same organization, you and Andrew, who was on here recently. And those guys are great. And, it also helps to work for great places, that I feel great talking about, and, bringing people to see and bringing people into treatment and all that. That certainly helps. I wanted to ask you one thing though, in my cursory research. And again, I didn't want to talk too much before it, and I didn't want to do too much research, but I see that you're also an artist. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah. I think I took a painting class. I was always interested in like in the arts, so to speak. I don't know why. I was just drawn to it from an early age. And I remember I was a junior in high school, and I took my first painting class, and we had to pick like an old master's painting and copy it. And I picked this painting by Francisco de Goya called Saturn Devouring His Son. It's this incredible painting. Really, I would suggest everyone look it up. I mean, it's a gigantic Saturn, God biting the head off his kid, which is pretty dark, fair, but it's a beautiful piece of work. And so in doing that, I started to like dig a little further into that space, and really fell in love with modern American art from like 1940 to like 1970. So you're talking like abstract expressionism. That's like Jackson Pollock, Andy Warhol, Mark Rothko, Ellsworth Kelly, like Clifford Still. These are the artists that I love. And that era, right? It was the first real American painting that existed, was
Hmm.
that time. And I just got drawn to it, and then I started making work. And really just behind the scenes, right? Like I would just paint stuff because I liked it. And when I was down in Louisiana after I'd gotten sober, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to like make art again sober. And I
Yeah.
bought this house, and I had like a an outbuilding behind it, and I turned that into a studio, and I started painting again. And then I started showing, and it was the first time I'd ever
Jeez.
really shown. Um, and that was a cool experience. Um, and just kept on from there, really. I still do. I kind of am a little phasey with it. I do it because I love it. But like right now I've got probably like 15 5 foot by 6 foot canvases that I've painted in the outbuilding behind my house here that like I need to move. But it's cool though, man. Like I have a few hanging in like different treatment facilities around Portland. I sell them here and there. I again, I make it because I love it. Um and it's a meditation.
Yeah. I mean, that's so cool. I certainly am not, I have no talent in the painting department. But what I will say is I love that you, you know, you're like, am I going to be able to do this sober? It's like, it's another one of those myths where like, how am I possibly going to be able to do anything creative sober? It's such a illusion. I mean, I was afraid of doing anything sober. And of course, I've done all the stuff I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do sober. I've done all, it's always better. But, I discovered this thing, in early recovery called The Artist's Way, which is written by a woman named Julia Cameron. Do you know about that? And it's like she's a 12-step person open about it, and it's 12 chapters and to reignite our inner artists. And I've gone through that twice. And
Awesome.
I, again, no talent, but it was one of those things I was just kind of willing to do it. I mean, I did write a little professionally in my early career days and all that. And so I just don't ever want to totally lose that. And like, but just the myth that we can't do this stuff and that we're not creative unless we're drunk or high is ridiculous.
It is. It is. And really like take it to even like the acting world, right? Like, I got to have some experience there. And I noticed like there's a lot of like very well known Tom Hardy, you know,
Yep.
guy got sober in the midst of his acting career, fear of I'm not gonna be able to do this without, great. Bradley Cooper. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. Oh, the list goes on and on and on and on. But yeah, I think you're so right. Like, yeah, walking through that fear of, I think when you're sober, you're more in line with who you really are. And if people don't like that, that can be a scary proposition. If I'm inebriated and I'm sending something out there, I was drunk, whatever, not a big deal. Like it's just
Right.
different. It hits a little deeper when it's really you. So I think that's probably a little part of it. But you're so right. I have not found any situation where I've tried to attempt to do anything in the creative space sober that has not been exponentially better than it was when I tried to do it under
Yeah.
the.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I woke up, at 2 in the afternoon or whatever with my laptop open, with cigarette butts and drinks sitting around it and whatever else, with, like page one with just like nothing written after sitting there thinking that had the cocktail just right to spark my inner creative genius. And of course next thing I know, I'm like going through old photo albums and not doing anything but the task I set out to do. So yeah, you mentioned that, the acting piece. Tell us more about that.
Well, I was living in Louisiana and I'd been sober about 5 years, and I turned 30 and I was like, you know what? Like, I think it's time to spread my wings a little bit. And I wanted to go back to graduate school. I wanted to go get my MBA. And so I got into Loyola Marymount out in Los Angeles and moved out to Venice Beach. And at the same time, I had always been really curious. I just for the sake of like my own curiosity, I wanted to take an acting class and just see what it was like. And you know what, man? I was 5 years sober. I felt pretty confident in who I was. I was like, I'm not scared to go in here and fall on my face, right? Like, So whatever happens, happens. So I'm going to grad school and I'm taking this Meisner acting class, which is one of the main like acting schools. And after about a year and a half, my teacher was like, you really need to like put a profile up on one of these free websites and start auditioning. Like it's time. It's like, okay. So of course I put a picture of me in my Giants jersey up there. Um, and I got called in to an audition for a Disney show. It was a show on Disney XD, which was like the Disney Teen Channel. And it was called I'm in the Band. And the episode I was auditioning for, there was 4 adult members of this band, and like the kid, the Disney connection was the kid who was like the singer. And this episode was going to have 4 giant versions of the band members and 4 miniature versions of the band members, and we were all going to fight each other. And so I was auditioning to be one of the giant members, and I booked it. And so that got me into the Screen Actors Guild and got my first experience really doing anything on camera in a big way. And I was really lucky, right? There's people that are out there trying to get in SAG for years. I just was really, really lucky. And I was also lucky in the sense that the guys I worked with that were the other 3 giant members of the band were really experienced stuntmen and actors. And what you find is guys my size, typically you need to be able to do stunts as well because there's just not a ton of work. You can always be a big guy who goes duh in the background, right? They just play the tropes, unless you're Vin Diesel, The Rock, which, I am not those people. So these guys, though, one of them was the motion capture guy for the Hulk. The other one was this 6'10" guy who's in Mensa named Dave Matty, who's like he's been a bodyguard in like every TV show you've ever seen. And they were great guys, and they started introducing me to people, and it's relationship building. It's like anything in life, right? Like you meet good people and you try to show up as a good human being, and they send you in the right directions. And so that kind of got me into that world, and I did some commercials. Did some TV and movie stuff, and really what happened was I was doing stunts more than anything else, and I injured my knee, and it was getting really bad to the point where, when you're in pain and it goes from being like uncomfortable to being almost like a spiritual injury, where it's like I was waking up tired because of how much physical pain I was in. And I was just like, man, I'm going to take an opiate if I don't do something about this. And so I went and saw a doctor, and they were like, you need to get a total knee replacement in your right knee at 35, And I was like, oof. And so I went back to Maryland, where I was born and raised, to get that surgery. Luckily, if you're a vested veteran, the NFL will pay for hip and knee replacements because they're so common for guys.
Yeah.
So I reached into that resource and got it covered, and went back to Maryland to have it done. Now I tell you this, like, and I always put this caveat in front of it when I tell people too, is like, if I was on this podcast like 3 years ago, I probably would have told you that like I did everything I could to set myself up to not have any issues around the surgery. But in reality, today looking at it, I don't think that's true. I think that in my depths of my spirit, I thought I had a free one, and that I could, use around that surgery with impunity and come back and not have to give you guys a new date, and everything would be fine. And it just wasn't, I woke up from that surgery and I clicked the button, and it was like that monster reawoke, it was crazy how fast it just was like there. And that started my relapse. And dude, that went for about 4 years. I don't burn it down quick, right? Like I'm a guy who will like hold it together pretty well. And that's probably to my detriment in the sense that if I'm not, it takes a while for people to realize, so it's like one of these things I put in, like one of my fail safes today is like maintaining absolutely transparent, honest communication with my sponsor and this inner circle of dudes in my life so that, you know, they're aware enough of any changes that come, because I just know myself, you know. So that relapse was what ended up happening was I got a job offer to work for a treatment operation up in New Hampshire, just because I had built a bunch of relationships the first time around in the field and knew a lot of people, and people knew I was back in Maryland. And, you know, it was kind of at this thing where I was like, look, I can go back and try to keep doing this stunt and acting stuff, but I got a spinal fusion. Now I've got a total knee replacement. Like, I need to kind of take it easy on my body. And like, I enjoyed my time working in treatment. So let's just do that. And
Mm-hmm.
I just justified it. I justified the relapse in the sense that I got put on those fentanyl patches. And I just told myself, look, man, like, I played in the NFL. I did stunts. Like, I've got a fake knee. I've got a spinal fusion, all these injuries and stuff. I have chronic pain. I'm doing it as it's prescribed. You know, no one's going to really understand what my lived experience is and what my body feels like. And so I'm not going to tell them, because they don't need to know. Um, and then, of course, I throw on like the utmost ridiculousness of like the martyrdom piece, where I'm like, oh, I'm doing this so that I'm able to be helpful to people in the world, right? Like, just like make sure the sword I fall on is as big as possible, right? It's like
Right.
ridiculous. And so that's how it went. And you know, after a couple of years, I remember I was like, I was driving back and forth. I was up in New Hampshire and I was driving back to Maryland once a month to fill my prescription. And it was a 16-hour round trip. And after a couple of years, man, I was just tired of doing it. And I just remember being like, look, I can probably get some heroin really easily and it'll do the same exact thing. Um, and so that's what I did. I walked out of my apartment, walked to the park across the street, asked somebody, yep, I know someone, get introduced to a dealer. And then, you know, what happens is then I'm spending all my money in short order on heroin. Um, while I'm sitting on prevention, treatment, and recovery panels with the governor and the DEA. And it's like you said earlier in our conversation, where you're talking about the more dirt you have to pour on to like keep the lie going, because it's so, you feel so fraudulent. And I just remember not being sober for a moment of my existence in that time. You know, I just stayed high, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I'm spending all my money at the dope dealers, I finally went to him and I said, look, I can't afford it. He said, well, look, if you'll drive 4 exits down the highway and pick up my load and bring it back to me, I'll give you your personal use amount for free. Makes perfect sense. And now I'm muling for an operation. Um, and so it went like that for a while, until it didn't. And it all blew up. And that was like a big reckoning for me. And I can tell you about that if you want to hear about it.
Absolutely, man.
Okay,
This is,
cool.
I appreciate you sharing it, man.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, man, right? Like, I mean, I'll tell you, man, that the experience of my relapse was such that, so what ends up happening is that guy, the guy I was driving for, got arrested. And I had brought a load back for him. He picked it up. About 30 minutes later, I get a phone call. He's gotten arrested. You need to get out of your apartment. I leave, I go hide out. And for the next month and a half, I'm trying to figure out how to live. And just like, I don't know if I even slept in that time, right? I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. Now I'm like recognizing the fact that, like, holy cow, this is like for real serious. Um, and it was September 17th of 2017, where we had come back from the Cape Cod Symposium. And I just kind of popped and was like, I need some dope. Um, so I drove down to Lawrence, Massachusetts, which I knew was like a heroin hotbed. Parked the car, went to the first guys I met on a stoop, bought 2 fingers, which is 20 grams of heroin. They come in a little 10 finger roll, 10 ounce or 10 gram rolls that look like a finger, right? So I bought 2 of those. I drive back across the border, and there's an unmarked in the middle of the highway. And I was like, that's strange. What's that guy doing there? Um, so I got off the highway and started trying to like take the back road home. And the next thing I know, there's 2 state troopers behind me with their lights on. They pull me over. And so I swallow one of those 10-gram fingers. And of course, like any good drug addict, I leave the other one in the center console. They get me out of the car, they find it, and right about then, that unmarked car pulls up, and they say, "Mr. Hatch, we know everything you've been involved in, and we think you should come talk to us." And like, that's never a fun experience, right? And so I get driven to some kind of like secret barracks, and I walk in this room, and there's like 8 detectives at this table, and they start asking me questions. And basically, what they let me know was that another one of the mules, another driver, had been flipped like 4 months prior. They'd been following everyone. They knew everything that was going on. They had caught the guy that I was close to, but they wanted the guy above him. And they're like, if you cooperate and try to help us, we won't prosecute, right? And I'm like, at that time, dude, number one, I didn't really know that guy. And number two, I'm trying to save my skin, you know? So I was like, whatever you want. And right about then, that 10-gram finger starts melting in my belly. And I end up like basically falling out at the table pretty much. And so they realize that I'm of no use anymore at this moment, and they drive me home. You know, they put me in a squad car. Somebody got behind this drove my car, parked it in my spot at my apartment building, walked me up to my apartment, and we're like, "We'll see you tomorrow." And I know it's so weird. Um, I woke
Wow.
up September 18th of 2017, which is my sobriety date, to a knock at the door, and it was the DEA, the FBI, and the New Hampshire State Police. And things got so real so fast, you know. And by the end of that meeting, they were leaving and saying, "Look, you're now with us, and you don't change anything in your life. You don't tell anybody what's happening, and you don't drink and you don't drug. Any of those 3 things trigger immediate arrest, and like, we'll be in touch." And they left. And there I was, man, by myself in my apartment, no longer under the influence, and like swallowing the fact that I am now under the thumb of the feds,
Mhm.
and nobody knows. And, you know, the first time I had ever felt like that real depth of pain and loneliness and darkness was before I went to treatment the first time. This was the second time. And this was, I was really at the edge, man. I mean, you know, it got to the point, and I don't want to, I hope this doesn't trigger anyone, but you know, like, I had written the note, and I had the box cutter under the sink in the bathroom, and I knew where I was going to sit, and like, I had it lined out because it was just like too much, dude. See, I couldn't even see a tunnel, let alone a light at the end of any tunnel. It was just, there's no way through this. But I also had had some experience in sobriety, and like, I knew that I had found some freedom from the bondage of self through the 11th step,
Yeah.
through prayer and meditation. And I knew I couldn't tell anyone what was going on, but I also knew that maybe I could find some space within myself that would provide me some relief from that bondage, you know? And so I think I dug into those practices in a deeper way than I ever had in my life, in the hopes that I would find something. And, you know, man, I'm so grateful to tell you that I did. Um, you know, I can't tell you exactly when it happened, but you know, in time, over some months there, um, things shifted for me, in the sense that I was capable of walking in this really utter chaos, dude. Like, my life was, you know, it was a real double life I was living at that point. But I had found something, some connection to source, right? Something that put me in a place where it was like, no matter what happens, dude, in this material world, no matter what happens to me third dimensionally, it cannot touch what exists between me and the God of my understanding. And like, I
Safe and
found that there,
protected.
you know, and
Yeah.
it changed my life. It really did, because it enabled me to keep living in the midst of that. Um, And I'll tell you what ends up happening, which is even crazier, is for whatever reason, it was 2019 now. So we've been in this situation for almost 2 years. It's July of 2019. And for whatever reason, this is in Trump's first term, Mike Pence decides he's going to come speak at the treatment center that I work at. So that's a big deal. And so the Secret Service comes the week before to vet everyone who's going to be there because the vice president's coming. And I'm like, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But I end up skirting it. For some reason, they didn't find anything. And I think it was because I was still an active member of some investigation that I wasn't in the system necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And the morning of the event, everyone's there, all the dignitaries and blah, blah, blah. And about 30 minutes before he's supposed to show up, they come out on the stage and they say, "We're so sorry. The vice president's had to cancel his trip. And we thank you all for coming and we'll see you later." And of course, I'm like this egotistical alcoholic who's 100% convinced right away that like, this is my fault. It's because of me and what's going on with me, right? And so I had an attorney at that point, and an attorney that I only got because the detective for the state police who had led the investigation into me became my closest confidant. This is a guy who came to me about a month into us being connected and said, "Look, man, when I met you, when I started to like coming at you, I thought you were the biggest piece of crap that I'd ever seen living. But in the month that I've now known you, like I've gotten to know you, you've explained this kind of disease model piece to me," because none of them had ever heard it, which I was completely shocked the DEA had never heard of the disease model of addiction. That seems a little weird.
Right.
But
Right.
this guy became my closest confidant. And about 6 months in, he said, "You know, you need to get an attorney." And so I got an attorney. And so I called that attorney and I said, "Hey, Chuck." He goes, "There's no way it's because of you." And then I called that detective and I said, "You know, Steve, what's up?" And he goes, "There's no way." I said, "Okay, fine. Like whatever it was, we'll find out." And it got some traction because I guess it's rare for that to happen, that they cancel an appearance like that. So they kind of asked Trump and "We'll tell you in a couple of weeks" and this and that. And they were kind of coded in their language. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got charged officially. It was because of me. The DEA guy had called Air Force 2 and said, "You cannot come speak here. We're about to charge this guy with trafficking. It'll be a really bad look." And so when I got charged, it became public information. It was like very public, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the weird thing for me was I was almost 2 years sober again when everyone found out. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't really, I had been facing the internal consequences for a long time, but the worldly consequences came then. You know, my attorney's office called. They said they're filing a charge. They're going to charge you with using a phone in commission of a drug crime. It's a federal felony. It's up to 4 years. And now like you can talk about it now because it's public, you know? So I pulled my boss in at the time and told him, and we cried. And then I went home and I sat down on the couch with the girl I'd been dating for a year and a half, who knew nothing about any of this, and said, "Hey, need to tell you something." And you know, well, I'll shout her out now. She's now she's now my wife, and we have our first baby coming at the end of August.
Oh my God.
You know, but she stood with me through that, man. And it was a really powerful thing that I didn't realize in the midst of her saying that she would stay, how much I would need it. But, you know, she's a woman in long-term recovery. She had never known me as the guy who had behaved that way. I was sober again when we met. And she leaned into those pieces of the guy that I was then. And like, I think her being a sober woman and stayed with me. And dude, I'll tell you what, man, that created a bond and like a tightness between she and I that is just like, dude, I think a lot of us, when we feel genuine love for another human being and we get in a long-term relationship with them, we'd say we'd like do anything for that person. Dude, I would do anything for her. I mean, she is my teammate. And so when it became public, I got fired from my job. So I lost my company car, lost my company phone. It did not end up in the New Hampshire paper like I thought. It ended up on CNN. There was an article in the New York Times. There was an article in the Washington Post. Um, there ended up being a 12-page story in Sports Illustrated. Like, I got torched nationally. And I got a lot of hate from a lot of people. And I want to say this to you now, without judgment or resentment, but I will tell you that, man, when I faced that situation, I had been a guy who had worked in the treatment field for a long time. And I had never done anything unethical. I never patient brokered. I never slept with a girl at a conference, right? Never did any of that stuff. And when I relapsed, I was blacklisted by a large percentage of people that I knew in the field. And I only say that out loud to you now in the hopes that maybe if this happens to someone else in the future and they live through the experience, that we're capable of practicing what we preach in the sense of second chances and loving our own and things like that, because I didn't experience that. Now I have to mitigate that by saying the way the story was presented, it almost looked as if I was like Pablo Escobar. I mean, it didn't say that I muled for an operation to get my personal use amount. It was like, it presented me as if I was, dealing heroin to a bunch of people and then trying to like sneak them into treatment and like all this stuff, So I got a little bit of why people would have responded that way, but I would also say, like, do your own research. Because if anybody had called me, I would have told them exactly what had happened. And so when that happened, I got a new sponsor because now I could talk about it. I went through the work again. I was walking to meetings. I was working at UPS, filling 18-wheelers. My girlfriend at the time would have to drive me there to my shift and pick me up. Her parents bought me a cell phone. And I was at the bottom again. But it was okay for me in the sense that I was experiencing this profound sense of relief in the fact that I wasn't carrying this ball and chain around lying about everything anymore. Like, everyone knew, and that was freeing for me. And doing the work again.
I was thinking about that, like 2 years of being under the thumb of the feds, but living a sober life, and your only outlet was, not that there's anything wrong with it, but there's a reason step 5 is to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, and in this case that just literally couldn't have one, or else you could get, and I would imagine that as awful as that whole thing was and going public, it had to have been liberating, as awful as it was, instead of having to hold on to that secret.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And look, I will say this too. There were some people that I had known in the field who got closer to me in that time. And like, I will name him now just because I think it's important to shout. I really treasure those people. One in particular is a guy named Tyson Stark.
Yeah.
Tyson worked at a program called Cumberland Heights. He now works for Cirque Lodge. He lives in California now. And Tyson and I had been friends for a long time. And Tyson at the time was opening up a program in Savannah, Georgia. And he called me and he said, "Hey man, I can't offer you much, but I know you, and I can offer you a job as our weekend tech for $15 an hour. And it'll get you guys out of New Hampshire and get you down to Savannah, and you guys can have like a fresh start." Wow. So we jumped at that. I took it to Lauren and I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "Let's go." And so we moved from New Hampshire down to Savannah. And right about then is when the pandemic hit.
Yeah. That's why I met you when you were with the place in Savannah.
Right.
In Atlanta.
Right. And so the pandemic hits and my federal case gets put on ice. And so I'm basically, now we're in Savannah, we're recreating a life there. And I'm kind of just waiting to find out what's going to happen. And man, I'll tell you, bro, it was 4.5 years before I finally got sentenced. And so I try to it's that piece of like gratitude in hindsight where I go like, what I learned in that experience was like, there's 4.5 years where when I woke up and when I went to bed, the first and last thought was like, is today or tomorrow the day I find out I go to federal prison? Mm-hmm. That was like legit. That was real. They were going to send me. Mm-hmm. And it forced a perspective on me of like maintaining presence.
Yeah.
I just had to look down at my feet and go like, where am I right now? And how can I be useful and helpful in this day, one day at a time, right? Because I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Not in some ethereal space,
Yeah.
like in
Really,
reality.
really and truly. Yeah.
Tomorrow I could get the call that you are to report to federal prison. And I'm so grateful for that because
So what happened?
It's how I live now.
So what happened with the case?
Oh, I ended up getting sentenced. So what happens is I go before the judge. I felt really good going into it. And then he started talking and I went, oh no. But what ended up happening was like my attorney did his thing. But you know what happened was the DAs then actually like went to bat for me with the judge. And they were like, look, this guy's been sober again for 4.5 years. He was a mule. He wasn't, there was never a dollar exchanged to this guy in this process. He made a terrible mistake, but it was around his disease, and they got it, man.
Wow.
And he went for it. So I got 3 years probation. And I'll tell you now that 3 years probation turned into 1.5 years because they ended it early because they knew I was not a risk, right? I wasn't, and so what happens then after I get sentenced and we know I'm not going to prison is now like life can move forward I had proposed by that point. So we were engaged and it's like life can move forward for us, right? We're no longer held hostage by this ongoing thing. And my wife very shortly was like, I want to move to the Pacific Northwest. And I said, whatever you want. Like, right? Like, yes, ma'am. We'll go. And so I made some calls to some people I knew and ended up getting an offer. And we moved out to now where we live in Vancouver, Washington. So it's just north of Portland, Oregon on the Washington side. And we've been here for 2.5 years. Like I said, my probation ended 1.5 years early. She and I got married October of 23. Got pregnant. Our first baby is due August 24th of this year. Own a home, like have this incredible job now with Eagle Creek Ranch. I worked at Summit for a while, which was great. And I've taken this gig with Andrew and Luke over there at Eagle Creek, which is so awesome. I just think the world of those guys and I love what they're doing and I'm ecstatic to be a part of it. So like life has gotten like really good for me, third dimensionally. But like, dude, I never forget that like that doesn't have a thing to do with my sobriety. Like, it's a result of it. But my sobriety is based on the fourth dimensional connection to my higher power. And really to me, B. Reeves, like being useful and helpful, dude. And that looks like me like sponsoring men, having a home group, like actively engaging in my recovery process every day, the daily disciplines that are required of me of being a sober man and like showing up in the world as my best self. And it's like such a pleasure. And I'm forever grateful because of what I've been through,
I mean, this is the best example of it being an inside job because you were by circumstances between you and God. And like, I can't take, I didn't know I didn't know about this. So I didn't know anything about any of this. So this has been absolutely incredible.
Thanks, man.
And I'm so happy for you. And I'm so happy for everybody in your orbit. And I consider myself in it. And I'm so happy for Luke and Andrew and Eagle Creek and our field and the recovery community and the world in general, man. This is just I'm glad you're here, man. Glad. And I hate it for you, but I'm glad you went through all that because it needed to happen,
Dude, that's it. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, I appreciate, I can tell that's genuine and that really does mean a lot. And I really appreciate it. And you're so right in the sense of like, we just never know what the other side of it looks like until we get there. And if you'd have told me the day those guys knocked at my door in 2017, that this is where I would be 7.5 years later, I would have said there's absolutely no way. But again, that's this gorgeous piece about this recovery process, right? It's like you show up, you do the next right thing, You practice the principles to the best of your ability, and miraculous things will happen, man. I want to tell you a really quick story, really quick, that happened just to speak to the power of our tribe. We were in Savannah. We had a grocery store that we go to, a Publix down there. You know, you have your regular grocery store, you know where everything is, blah, 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 blah. We're in there all the time. And one thing that happens, my wife and I go out, is my wife is 5'1", I'm 6'7". So I get comments about how tall I am and like, am I a wrestler? Do I play sports? A lot anyways, which I'm always happy to like acquiesce and just be like, oh, I play squash, or like, you know, I'm a wicked racquetball player, whatever it looks like, you know. But
Yeah.
when she's with me, it's even more so because I look that much taller. And there was this one guy who worked at this Publix in Savannah that really was writing me about what sport I played and all this. And one day he finally like kind of pinned me down and was like, I know you played football. And I said, yes, I did. He said, where'd you play? Well, I said, I played at Severn School in Severna Park, Maryland. Did you play in college? Yes, I did. Where did you play? University of Pennsylvania. Did you play after college? And I look at my wife. I'm like, I'll just tell him. And so I say, yes, I did. Who'd you play for? The Giants and the Bucks. What's your name? And I'm immediately like, I don't care about the football. I don't want this guy to Google me, because if you Google me, dude, the first 10 stories that come up are about my case and about the behaviors I was, you know, the things I was doing in the midst of that. And I don't want that to be, we have to find a new grocery store. I don't want everyone at the grocery store knowing I'm a heroin trafficker. It's uncomfortable. And I'm like all in this shame and like self, you know, bondage of self with this. And so we leave the grocery store and I'm feeling that. And I wake up the next morning, dude, and there's an email in my inbox, my work email. This guy had looked me up and he found my email and he sent me an email and he said, hey, Jeff, it's Mike from Publix. I wanted to let you know that I've been sober for 12 years and I'm so grateful you made it back. And I'm so happy for you that you're still here. You know, it was like powerful.
It's unreal, man.
You know, it's like, that's the thing. This thing shows up when I need it most. And it did there, and it's done it countless times since, you know? So just super grateful.
Yeah. Well, that's an unbelievably perfect place to end it. So I can't even begin to thank you for this. So I'm so, again, just happy to know you and thank you for being here. And before we do go, just quickly tell the listeners how to find you in Eagle Creek.
Yeah. So you're going to look for Eagle Creek at eaglecreekranchrecovery.com. Please check it out. Amazing program, 15 bed, men only. Just really
great program.
Really
we love them.
Awesome work. And as far as me, you can find me at hatch-coaching.com. That's my coaching website, which I'm doing too. And it kind of has all the stuff from me on there. It's got my brand on there and all the other stuff. So hatch-coaching.com is where you can find me.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. Jeff Hatch, everybody. If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.